I'm Matt Pillar. This is the business of biotech, and my guest on today's show is unique in that he never fully turned the corner when he entered the biotech leadership ranks. He's founded and led a couple of biotechs now, including the exciting new company he's found in Tome Biosciences. He even held a leadership post at AstraZeneca for a while, but he's also still a practicing physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital. On today's episode of the Business of Biotech, Dr. Rahul Kakkar, President and CEO at Tome Biosciences, joins us to talk about his worldview as a physician slash biotech exec, how that perspective informs his affinities and his approaches to different modalities, the gene therapy tipping point, and a whole lot more. Dr. Kakkar, I'm thrilled to have you on the show and welcome.
Matt, pleasure's mine. It's Rahul, please.
All right, there you go. We'll go with that from here on out. And here's where I want to start. I want to start with story time, Rahul. That's where I want to start because there's a story, I'm sure, in the transition from your undergrad to life sciences, because you earned your BA at Tufts in art and architectural history. And then at some point, and this is the story I want to hear, you decided you're going to stick around for an MD. You know, I don't see that every day. So tell us what was going on there.
I was laughing as I saw the question you were going to ask. I was like, you really had to dig deep in the internet to find that one, given how long I've been around. I have been. I guess there's two answers to that. One, I've been a bit of a black sheep everywhere I've gone in my professional career. And my pivots in my career, whether it was coming out of undergrad or even moving from academia into industry, has been a series of, I guess, to be kind, you could call it epiphanies, more like panic attacks were probably a more accurate way of saying it. But I fell in love with art and architectural history over the course of my undergrad. I actually fell in love with it in high school, to be honest. I remember I was the only one sitting in the basement of the converted church taking the architectural history AP class exam in high school.
That was an option for you in high school?
It was.
Wow.
I was the only one sitting in that basement taking the exam.
That's really cool.
I loved looking at the human experience from the perspective of the things we've built and the things we've made. I think they tell a much more vibrant and interesting story of who we are, rather than the way history is usually taught. And so that probably because I couldn't stay awake in history class, that's kind of how I chose to really understand, questions that all of us think about at some point in our lives, which is, where have we been and where are we going? Fundamentally, though, moving away from the study of art and architectural history, or even consideration for a career as an architect, which was a serious consideration for a while, rested on, like many things, the guidance of my parents, where, moving into the sciences and medicine was seen as a more stable career, a more reliable career. And my parents were immigrants to this country, and worked their tails off to go from effectively nothing. My father's family was one of those families that had to move from what is now Pakistan into India when the British cut the country. And so literally when he came here, he had nothing to his name, and worked very, very hard to put me through school. And so his advice was, you can love and study whatever you'd like, but at the end of the day, you've got to support your family. So that was sort of the push into the sciences. But I never was satisfied with just, I don't want to say just, but with becoming a practicing physician and practicing my entire career. And so that kind of led to the second panic attack, which was at the end of my cardiology fellowship at MGH, when again, I really wanted to be part of the story of how we move, in this case, human health, but our society forward, rather than being someone who simply practiced.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wow. That's a pretty cool story. There's still conflict though happening for me, like between the sort of the liberal arts bend, the right and left side of the brain, right? Like how do you reconcile that? Like I don't know, making the leap. I mean, I could see from art and architectural history to perhaps architecture, but then, there's a leap to perhaps architectural engineering. And then it's a whole different ballgame to leap into uh, medicine, right? Like, do you, was there any conflict or struggle internally with you in terms of like, the right and left side of the brain kind of arguing with one another about where your true skills and passions lied?
Oh, intensely, intensely. So I actually got into medical school early in my second year of college. And so that really opened up the last couple of years of college to really study whatever I wanted, which is where I focused on art and architectural history. Um, and I actually took a year off because I seriously considered moving away from the sciences because I was already accepted to Tufts Medical School. I was now, graduating with a major in art and architectural history or art history with a focus in architecture. And that struggle that you allude to astutely was front and center when I decided I'm not really sure I want to go to med school at the end of the day. Um, so my father's company, which was in Lynn, Massachusetts, a steel manufacturing company, needed a draftsman. And so I went and worked in the family business for a year.
Really?
The Logan Airport Terminal A light fixtures are what I worked on. Kind of drafting those out for lifting the plans from the architect's plans and then detailing them out so our shop could actually make the curved steel to go into the soffits. And after that year of essentially working in boots on the ground, right, in a steel manufacturing company, going out to the site to Logan Airport, seeing these things fabricated in the plant and then installed. I don't know what it is, but it's almost like I got it out of my system. At the end of that year came along and I said, you know what, I've got this acceptance at medical school. And I think I'll regret it if I don't give it a shot. And I went matriculated and was happier than I've ever been. And I don't think I would have really put heart and soul into medical school had I not had that experience. And today, gap years are common for people going into medicine. It wasn't at the time. Back in the 1800s when I went to med school.
Oh, no, don't say that. I think you and I are roughly the same age, so let's not go there.
But I think they're incredibly important because I think it's very hard to relate to patients who are in many cases decades older than you are when you're a med student or an early resident, unless you've gone out there and actually experienced some part of the world. Some of my classmates who I respected the most had traveled the world for a year in their gap years. And like I said, at the time, that was not the norm. So I think particularly if there is in medicine, it's in many ways a humanity in and of itself. And I think to really do patients justice, you have to have some real world experience yourself. And I think getting that early on is incredibly important. And I actually applaud the move to more people taking gap years before they head into the rigors of medical school and residency.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the patient exposure early on. And more often than not, when I talk with a physician turned founder or physician turned, biotech builder, the physician part is planted firmly in the past. You continue to practice. And you just mentioned that you couldn't see yourself practicing, being a practicing physician for the duration of your career. Yet you continue to do that even as you build biotech businesses. Why? Why do you choose to continue to practice right now?
I have such incredible respect for physicians who practice full time. It's become an incredibly difficult industry. Over the course of my career of practicing from 2011, when I graduated from my fellowship, to now even, it's only become more fractured. The number of individuals going into medicine and practicing has decreased over time. And the pressures that physicians face day in and day out, battling not just human disease, but battling a system that doesn't serve them or their patients, takes an incredible amount of patience and dedication. And so my hat's off to them. I'm not good enough to weather those kinds of daily slings and arrows that my PCP does, for instance. When I left Mass General, I finished my fellowship and went to AstraZeneca. The dirty little secret is I actually left MGH without a plan. I had been doing some consulting slash intern work for Brian Roberts at Venrock, really opened to my eyes to the ecosystem of venture investment in biotech.
Mhm.
This was about the last 6 months or so of my cardiology fellowship. So it would have been end of 2010, early 20 into 2011, first half of 2011, and fell in love with the translation of science to useful tools, diagnostics, and medicines. And Brian offered me to come join him in California, which was for me a dream come true. But my wife at the time said, we're both in medicine. We're planning to have children. All our parents are out here, and you want to go where?
Yeah.
California? I don't think so. Which was wise because it would have been very hard to raise a family being so far away from the infrastructure as it was of grandparents. And I grew up without grandparents since they were all in India. So I definitely wanted my kids to have their grandparents around. But I left, saying no to MGH, and hats off to Brian Roberts for continuing to be a mentor and a friend after I told him no all those years ago,
Yeah.
which was one of the hardest professional decisions I've ever had to make in my life. Um, and and I that point I continued to practice because I had, I think, 2011. Yeah, 2011, we were starting a family, and I didn't have a stable job. And even when Don Frail at AstraZeneca rescued me from kind of wandering a Waltham looking for a job, and Cambridge, I still didn't know what was going to happen in biotech, and
Yeah.
needed to provide for my family. So at first it was really necessity. And I will say I did get a bit. I was working at the Winchester Hospital, which is a small community hospital, town I grew up in, actually, Winchester, Mass, pulling intensive care unit shifts overnight, and then heading into AstraZeneca during the day to do drug development. And it's the kind of thing you can do when you're in your early 30s because you don't need a lot of sleep. It is
Right.
definitely not something I can do now. But at first it was a necessity. But over those first several years, I just found that there was a thrill of being up all night, a patient in septic shock, throwing in a line, doing the right things to pull them through the night and give them a chance at the light of day to overcome their infection or their cardiogenic shock or whatever they were going through. And I said to myself at the time, when I hit 40, my biotech career was doing okay. I'll stop practicing. And then I hit 40 and I realized I couldn't give it up. And now I'm coming up near 50. I'm not sure I'll ever stop. There is, even though I haven't been in strict cardiovascular drug development since my first company, since Corvidia, although there are some cardiovascular programs that we're thinking about here at Tome. In fact, I just came out of a meeting where we're discussing one of our first potential cardiovascular targets, which makes me incredibly excited. There is a cross fertilization of going into the hospital 1 week a quarter, which is about what I do, helping patients and their families understand the risk benefit of whatever procedure, surgery, even just medicine that is medically indicated. And then coming back to Tome and really thinking about the programs we're pursuing, not from will they work in a mouse, in a monkey, in a what have you, but ultimately, if I were to try to prescribe this drug to a patient of mine, what's the conversation I would have? What's the risk benefit? Could I hand on heart and ethically make that argument to my patient, whether they are my patient, my family member, what have you? So it's grounding. It's incredibly grounding.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting, but I can't imagine stopping.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the assumed sort of physician, biotech leader connection, right? Where is there perhaps still conflict or have you seen conflict between the two roles that you play now? I keep focusing on conflict. I don't mean to do that. I don't mean to make this a negative conversation, but I mean, even in your personal life, like it's got to be tolling on your family, taxing on your family, I'm sure to some degree during those weeks where you're, still practicing or.
For sure. I think the conflict comes when I routinely, particularly given that Tome is in cell and gene therapy, right, which are some of the most expensive areas of medicine. And I go into the hospital and I want to put a patient on AFib on apixaban, which is a branded blood thinner. And there's 2 to 3 other drugs in the same drug class that I could choose from. That's my preferred because it doesn't have as much danger when somebody has kidney disease as well. And a lot of cardiovascular patients have kidney disease. And myself and the team, whether it's the nurse practitioners or the residents, have to cycle through drug after drug in the drug class, potentially to a drug that's less ideal because their insurance company won't cover it. And we are dealing with patients being discharged and having to switch medicines because they can't get coverage for, because whatever the drug that is ideal for them, that at least in my judgment is ideal for them, isn't covered. These cost considerations come in routinely in decisions around which drug to choose. And going from that, and these are drugs that are a few $1,000s a year. Never
Right.
mind cell and gene therapy, which are priced in the millions. And so there is a conflict, which is over time, and Tome is still very early, we're still preclinical, but over time, how do we craft a commercial strategy around cell and gene therapy that is still grounded in the fundamentals of value to the patient, more so than how do we maximize our return?
Do you struggle to put keep that in perspective in these early days at Tome, or is it your sort of natural inclination to want to fast forward to tackling that problem, given that you've got that patient exposure and the payer experience on a regular basis?
Not as much. I mean, I think, we are many, many years away from approvals, not as many years away from the clinic per se. And honestly, if these drugs work, we'll be doing good for patients even on a limited basis in early clinical trials. I don't necessarily want to fast forward it because I think, these are very, very novel technologies which are irreversibly manipulating the genome. I think the caution that we and others in this CRISPR DNA space are taking is prudent.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a little bit earlier, you mentioned that, when you got bit sort of by the venture capital bug and started learning a bit about translational science. And I mean, that's exciting stuff, right? Like looking, especially when you've got an MD, when you've got some experience with medicine, looking at, molecules, mechanisms of action, pathways, and having an opportunity to shape those like winners in your mind. Had you prior to that exposure, had you had any translational experience, perhaps in academia? Like, had you worked in any labs? Did you kind of have a sense of what that was all about when you were exposed to it in industry?
Zero. And
Zero.
but the difference is I thought I did, but looking back, I had no idea what I was doing. In fact, when I was working in one of the reasons I chose the lab that I worked in as part of my cardiology fellowship, which is the lab of Richard Lee at the Brigham, it was because Richard was very entrepreneurial, had started several companies, had always had this translational bent. But he and I have tremendous respect for him. I had a great time in his lab, but we butted heads in a collegial way. But we butted heads because all I wanted to do was take the molecule I was working on that the science at the time was suggesting was cardioprotective. And move it into pig studies so we could move it into human studies. And Richard's advice, which was absolutely correct, was if you're going to have an academic career, you need to keep chasing that molecule in a dish because that's what you're going to write your next grant on. Mm-hmm. So I knew I had an instinct to see this, to see molecules move into human medicine and see what good they can do. But I was incredibly naive at how complex and how difficult that process actually is.